Thank you, everyone. I want to say one thing that's very positive. I want to applaud Speaker Bosma here in particular for trying to set a better bipartisan civil tone for the people of Indiana. We've had a rough past few years. I think the people of Indiana deserve their debates happening in a civil manner, in a cooperative manner, and I think that's been a good thing. But there's one unfortunate thing I have to point out. Bipartisanship is important, but it's evident now that we need tripartisanship because it's seeming that there's two Republican parties at the moment, two groups trying to be the governing coalition for this state. And if you want a whip count, here it is. It was the last vote of the third reading deadline on school accountability and turnaround academies. What we have here is one group of Republicans that is conservative but pragmatic and wanting to work together for the people of Indiana. We have another group that is extremely ideological and unwavering in the policies that they want to impose on others. And that's problematic because we don't have a clear message coming from the Republican majorities and the governor. We don't have a clear direction for Indiana. And I'm not sure that that's good for the state because the state deserves clear alternatives that they can choose from. And unfortunately, we don't have that at the moment. Now, what's a consequence of that? A consequence is that we failed to pass the biggest jobs bill of the 2013 session and maybe the biggest jobs bill of a generation. And that's the health care expansion. It was slaughtered on the altar of national politics. And that's regrettable. There's possibly 30,000 private sector jobs that could come from serving people in clinics and in doctors' offices and not emergency rooms. And it withered on the vine of the House calendar the other day. And I think that's regrettable. 30,000 Hoosiers could begin to be hired by hospitals and healthcare providers. And they're being prevented from doing that. I understand over in Senator Long's press conference, Governor John Kasich was exposed as being a left-wing radical. But, you know, he said the right things when it came to expanding health care. And I'm going to quote him. I can't look at the disabled, I can't look at the poor, I can't look at the mentally ill, I can't look at the addicted and think we ought to ignore them. I applaud these words. And Governor Pence ought to embrace the recommendations from our neighboring governors and even people like Rick Scott in Florida. Again, no left-winger thinking that we need to make sure that every Hoosier is seen by a doctor who's not in an emergency room is their first order of health care. Senator Lanane?
Thank you, Leader Pelath. Appreciate your comments there. I, too, would also sort of reinforce that I think generally there has been more of a bipartisan tone overall. I've had many of my constituents say they've noted that, so I want to commend the pro tem in that regards. I too, though, have noted this sort of split within the majority party. It's probably not quite as pronounced in the Senate as it may be here in the House, Mr. Leader. But there still is, I think, when it comes to the Health Care Act, for example, some clinging to a belief that we just aren't going to do what is required by the state of Indiana. And I think it's led to this sort of feeling of that there's some foot dragging, or, well, let's try to do it in the most difficult manner possible, as opposed to being pragmatic about it and accepting the fact that the easiest, the most certain way to do this is an expansion of our current Medicaid system. We know what we're going to get there. We're going to get approval by the federal government. We know we're going to get the creation of about 30,000 decent jobs for the state of Indiana, so it's a tremendous, as you say, the best economic development bill that's been possible for us here in this session. We know we're going to get the coverage for people. So I will say this, the Senate yesterday, we did pass out our version of the Health Care Act, Senate Bill 551, and there was bipartisan support for that because of a belief that the conversation needs to continue. It's coming over to your chamber, Mr. Leader, and we're looking forward to your leadership and the leadership of your caucus on this issue. I suppose the one good thing I would say about this, I think that gradually there is a recognition. This is the law of the land. This is the law of the land. When you have all those governors that you just mentioned, as who heretofore have been stalwartly against the Affordable Care Act, who now say, well, you know, let's do what's best though for the state, and they've decided that the expansion of Medicaid is the route to go. So that'll be the I think the real debate on that. I do want to, as I think is the duty of the minority party when there are supermajorities, point out a couple of instances where I feel like the Senate abused their power in this case. I think the public watches whenever there's a supermajority. How do they respond? Are they responsible in having that majority or not? There were two bills where I really felt like it was just an exercise in raw power, if you will. And the first one I've dubbed it the Marion County Power Grab, Senate Bill 621, where, just a little background there, all cities in the state of Indiana, including first-class cities, all second-class, third-class cities, have a city council which is composed of both district members and at-large members. Here in Marion County, the breakdown on that is 19 Democrats, 16 Republicans, so Democrats do have the majority, with 4 of those seats being at-large seats, all held by Democrats. Along comes Senate Bill 621 to do what? To abolish the at-large members of the Marion County City Council. All right, well, let's see. You know, the math figures out that if those seats go away, then the majority is switched. We all know what's going on in Marion County. The political landscape is changing. This seems to me just to be a way that the Republican Party is trying to cling to the power which really, realistically, no longer exists in Marion County. So in my opinion, that was just an exercise asking what's the public policy for why we would get rid of at-large members in one city as opposed to all other cities in the state of Indiana. I didn't hear one good public policy reason for why that would occur. The second bill I want to point out, this is a little bit, was buried in this bill, but Senate Bill 518, where it has to do with the voter ID requirement in the state of Indiana. And for the first time in the state of Indiana, we're going to authorize purely partisan officials at the polls, those being the challengers, to have the ability to demand that the voters show a voter ID. Now, as you know, we already have the election officers themselves, the inspectors, the clerks, the other people who are trained in the issue of what is proper IDs, who take an oath to administer those laws in a fair and a bipartisan fashion, who can demand and do demand voter IDs. But for the first time, we're going to allow the challengers, who are appointed by the political parties, to have that authority to demand of the voters to see the voter ID. So now you may have a situation where as many as 7 or 8 people at a poll can ask to see your voter ID. Again, what was the reason for that? No reason given, just they had the ability to pass that type of a bill. So I did want to point those out, Mr. Leader.